We should actually listen to this. It's all about the trusts and trustees. It's there. Say good morning. He's just said good morning to you.
Once I heard.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get my correct one. Just everything's bombed out now.
Use.
Mm.
Right next electric wires.
Right. At least all of us got used to ESCOM by now. Just almost got a heart attack.
Perfect.
Right. As you can all hear me, so I was on this slide talking about the different service offerings where we have to communicate with our client in terms of what we're providing and what we're not. Oops, what we're providing and what we're not providing.
This is the person from.
Okay, so yeah, the accounting, not administration, not compliance. We need to take that to a client, and today now they are also accountable institutions, and we'll have a look at that now, and then we can take it from there. And I believe everybody needs a separate engagement letter to provide the service and to actually have line of sight in terms of what service he's getting and what he's paying for. And at least I think days are over for clients to kind of get these things for free. So I always have this slide in as a standard vehicle of the false profits. So I just want to put a disclaimer today. I say something that is not 100% accurate. And also I have, I'm very happy to share that I am sharing the stage with Marianne, who reached out after last month's discussion to actually take us through the technical aspects. And so we're going to give her about 30 minutes to go through it, and then I will just share some slides, and then we can actually have a look at some questions that we can open to the floor then. So I hope that will work. And for those who can stay after 10, we could probably go till 10:15 or even 10:30. I'll also share the presentation in any event with everybody. So welcome, Marianne. If you can take us through kind of the technical stuff. And now I just need to make you one of the presenters.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm going to try and share my slides in the meantime.
You coming all right, Marianne?
Yes, I'm good. If you can just tell me if you can see my slides.
Yes, I can see slides. Yes, 100%.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Marianne, and I'm a compliance officer at Wildco. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you a bit about FIC compliance. I've been fortunate enough to deal with it through the financial services side for a while now. And yeah, I'm glad to share my experiences, and I hope I can help some of you at least to come to grips of what's going on at the moment, because let's face it, there's a lot going on. So yeah, there's the agenda for today. We're going to have a short introduction. I'm going to talk to you about, I call there the seven pillars of compliance. So the 7 things you need to make sure that you have in place if you are an accountable institution. I'm going to say a few words about Directive 8 and then about the interaction of POPI and FICA. And then I'll just maybe a notice to you guys about the due date that's coming up at the end of the month. Okay, so as you're aware that trustees must keep a register of accountable institutions. Now that schedule with the accountable institutions changed quite dramatically. So there is a short, well, not a short list, but the short indication of who are all the accountable institutions at the moment. So I think the one you're interested in is that second little block, trust and company services providers. Some of the newer ones are the crypto asset services providers. The high value goods dealers are also a new one. Yeah, so it's become quite interesting. I don't want to linger too much on it, but yeah, just so that you know who are the accountable institutions at the moment besides yourselves. Okay, so and then I think the big one is about interpretation of item 2 of schedule 1. So I gave the full definition, yeah, and I want to focus just a bit on those 2 phrases that I highlighted there, the carrying on of business and the creation, operation and management of a company. So if we talk about carrying on a business, we need to make sure it's for a commercial purpose and you sort of do it on a regular basis. It won't be those instances where you do it on a once-off basis or intermittently or for a charitable reason or whatever. You're making money from this. This is a regular feature of your business. And then I think also one that everybody's struggling with, and I'm really looking forward, the regulator is at the moment reviewing the guidance note on this, and I hope, you know, there will be some better guidance once this is released. It talks about the creation, operation and management. And when you specifically look at the operation phrase, they say it assists, you assist the client in their daily operations. So that's the FIC indicated that you must interpret this very wide and it will include various professions. So if you meet the definition, you're an accountable institution. So, I mean, the examples they've given in recent workshops includes structuring, accountants, preparing of financial statements, submission of taxes on behalf of someone, and even legal work. They spoke about if you advise a client on legal requirements of setting up a company, you also need to register. So if you look at that, and if we can, I'm quickly going to jump back to my first slide there. You'll see legal practitioners are an accountable institutions by themselves already. And now they also incorporated here in item 2. So they'll, for example, definitely have more than one registration with the FIC. So it gets quite complicated. So yeah, but like I said, the FIC is very clear. You need to go and measure, do you fit into that definition? And if you do, no matter what your profession is, you need to register as accountable institution under this item. Yeah, I'm like I said, I think it's quite tricky, and hopefully there will be some more guidance from the FIC going forward. Okay, so the next topic here, I want to talk about what I call the 7 pillars of compliance. So, you know, I think a lot of people think that once you've registered, that's it, you're done and dusted. Not so. There's 7 other things that you need to comply with. So registration, governance, risk management and compliance program, customer due diligence, training, reporting and record keeping. So when this new schedule came into operation, we have 18 months now from that date to comply with all these requirements. So the date of publication was already in December, so we're already 6 months down the line. So, you know, we're left here with a year to comply, basically, which sounds like a lot, but there's quite a few things that you need to get in place. And I say there, the 18 months, you've got 18 months to comply, excluding registration. Because registration you're supposed to do within 90 days of becoming an accountable institution. Okay. So initially the FIC came out, and when they published the amended schedules and say they will conduct inspections and issue administrative sanctions if needed, and they didn't envisage in finding the new sectors, so the high value goods dealers, the crypto asset providers, all the brand new ones. Later on, just before the due date though, for the closure of registration, they came out and said that they can give you an administrative fine if you do not register. Okay. So you can think now the due date has come and gone for registration. My opinion is that you should perhaps look into registering as soon as possible. And I'm going to look, there's a little gray box there that gives examples of penalties. And you'll see on that first one where the FIC actually fined somebody for not registering. There were some other issues there as well, but they did get a fine for not registering. And I'll get back to that block just now. So when we talk about registering, so all accountable institutions in terms of Schedule 1 must register. So all those little blocks that I just showed you, they must all register. There's that 90 days deadline for which you must register. And that registration is on the Go AML system. So it's an online registration. And the documents that you actually need is an appointment letter and a certified copy of the ID of the person that's actually registering. Okay, so it's free registration. They won't issue with a license. You will get the letter to confirm that you have been registered. Just a note there, you must pick whether you register as an individual or as an organization. Pick the organization one, even if you're a sole proprietor. Okay. I know I said there your email address is a unique identifier on the system. I know there's a lot of people experiencing problems with registering because they're trying to register the same person for multiple entities. And the system won't allow you to do that. So just use a different email address so even if I also experienced that issue, so I use different email addresses just for every different registration that I had to do. Okay. Then it's also important just to keep those details up to date. Again, you have 90 days to update. So if you move offices, just let the FIC know that you actually moved offices and update those details. Very important, and the FIC is also very adamant about this, that you're not allowed to share your login details. Okay, only you are allowed to use those login details. Now, one way, because I mean, for example, if I'm registered with the FIC, I'm not there every day. I go on leave or I get sick or whatever the case may be. So it's handy to just register a money laundering reporting officer as well. So there's a backup for yourself to actually do the reporting of whatever needs to be done on the system. Okay, and also remember, check your message board. Okay, so there I also say just failure to register can give you a administrative penalty. There's sort of the maximum fines there. And And if we just go back to that little block on the side, they don't give everybody sort of the same level of fines. They do take into account what your income is. Okay, so if you go back to that block, you'll see that second one, the SARB, which is also a supervisory body for in terms of FICA, they fined Sanlam R1 million. Okay, for something, you know, not identifying one person, not, you know, submitting 2 reports. And then again, the FICA, one of the other supervisory bodies, they fined the FSP 20,000 Rand. So that the idea is not to close your doors. The idea is to deter you and other people from doing the same. And obviously these fines get published. So it serves, as I said, as a deterrent, and you may basically made an example of. Okay. Did I skip? No. So a lot of people ask, you know, but I've got branches, I've got multiple entities within my group. How do I register? So I quoted a little example, and that's a quote from PCC 5C, and that's actually the bit you can go and read on everything about registration. So if you've got different entities within your group, and we've also experienced that for my company that I work for, everybody, all those business units or divisions must register separately. Okay. And then there's always also a question of what about all my branches? As a general rule, your branches must also register separately. There are certain exceptions there. I'm not going to go through everyone, but I think the one applicable to us today is where for trust item 2, where the trust, your nature and of your business and the clients of a trust company does not differ substantially. So, and then you do not register your branches separately. So you need to go and ask yourself across your branches, are the nature of your business and your clients basically the same, then you don't need separate registration. Okay. I would suggest though that you consider appointing a money laundering officer for each of those entities or those branches, so that you've got someone in the branch that knows the clients and the business that would be able to identify, and we'll talk about suspicious activities and reporting a bit later on, to identify those instances and do the proper reporting. And then I think from that example that I've given, yes, multiple accountable institutions do multiple registrations. And then it's also possible, as I said earlier, to have a dual registration or even more than 2 registrations under different schedule items. Okay, so the next leg or the next pillar in our compliance building is governance, or what they also call a compliance function. So ultimately, your board of directors is responsible for compliance with FICA, and your risk management and compliance program is your internal policy, basically. But you can imagine the CEO would not necessarily have the time to deal with the day-to-day operations side of this. So they can appoint a compliance officer. Now, the only people that can't appoint a compliance officer is the sole proprietor, for obvious reasons. This is actually one of the functions you cannot outsource in terms of FICA, your compliance function. You can, though, get somebody to assist you. And you need to make sure that compliance officer that you do appoint got sufficient competency, so they've got experience, and they're a senior person within your company. So you preferably prefer that person that reports directly into your board of directors. As I said in the previous slide with the registration, you need a appointment letter. So here is where that appointment letter comes in. The board of directors appoints your compliance officer or compliance function. if you want to read more about what you can outsource and not outsource, you can go and read that Public Compliance Communication 12A. I unfortunately won't be able to have time today to deal with that in detail, but yeah, please go and read that. Okay, so our next pillar in our building is a risk management and compliance program. So if you go and read Public Compliance Communication 53, there's a little template in there, but it comes with a little bit of a warning as well. You need to customize it for your business. It's something that the FIC will fine you on if they do find that you did not customize it to your business. So it's a nice guideline, but don't use it as is. Okay, so if you read section 42, it basically gives you a little checklist of what must be in your risk management and compliance program. So remember, this is your internal policy of how you're going to deal with FICA or money laundering, or anti-money laundering rather, in your business. Important thing is that you must deal with all those items listed in section 42 in your compliance risk RMCP. Even if something is not applicable to you. So I use the example there, and it's just because it's one that's familiar with to me. We don't have branches in our business. So if you don't have branches, you simply state, I did not incorporate a process of in my RMCP to deal with branches because I simply don't have branches. So make sure you also say why you didn't deal with something in your RMCP. That's also important. And then make sure it gets approved by your board of directors or your senior management, those people responsible for FICA compliance in your business. And this RMCP is not a document set in stone. So you review it as you go along. And it's actually quite important to keep up with the changes in legislation. So if there's a change that affects you, incorporate it into your RMCP, make sure your board approves it again after that. Okay, so our next pillar, customer due diligence. So you have the obligation to identify and verify your potential clients actually before you start a business relationship with them. Okay, so this is not a once-off process. There's instances where you're going to redo this client due diligence. And I made the example there when you doubt the accuracy or adequacy of the information you got at hand. And a new one that came in with the legislative changes now is when you submit a suspicious activity or transaction report. So we'll deal with reporting a bit later on. So we'll talk about that one again. And it also says based on your risk rating of your client. Okay, so FICA promotes a risk-based approach. We've moved away from a setup where you follow a rules-based or a tick list-based approach. We follow a risk-based approach. So practically, what does that mean when we deal with customer due diligence? It will be the same way as an insurance company deals with their clients. So if Fia and I both buy this exact same cars, we go to the exact same insurance company and apply for insurance on our cars, the likelihood that we would get the exact same quote from that insurance company is very small, because the risk associated with that individual differs. So that's now what you need to go and do with your client as well. You need to go and say that you must develop a risk tool. You must go, you know your client base. You will know, say, for example, Marianne is located in some country that doesn't have quite nice or good anti-money laundering legislation in place. I would obviously be a higher risk client. You'll also remember if you filled in your Directive 6, there would have been a question, do you operate within 200 kilometers of a border? That would also be a risk factor, simply because it would lend sort of that, expose the client to smuggling activities and that kind of thing. Not to say that your client actually does it, but you know, that's a risk factor that you need to take in consideration. Then you would risk rate your client either as low, medium, or high. And then based on that, so if Marianne is a low risk client, you would actually just review her documents every 5 years. If it's a high risk client, you review that person every year. Okay, and incorporate that risk rating tool into your RMCP. That would also be something that the FIC would look at when they do come and visit you. Okay, so one thing that I want to focus on specifically, because we are dealing with trust companies and trust as clients, this Act specifically says when you deal with trust partnerships and other legal entities, you need to do additional due diligence. So you need to go beyond that, getting somebody's ID, proof of residence type of documents. And they are set out that you need to identify and verify. So identify, Marianne tells you her name is Marianne. How do you verify that? You get a copy of her ID. And I think if you look at those requirements that the Act says, the name and number of a trust, address of the Master of a High Court, ID of the founder, the trustees, somebody authorized to act on behalf of the trust, and so on and so on. You'll see that once you have the trust deed and a letter of authority in front of you, you'll be able to verify the information from that. So I think it's quite a simple step if you deal with a South African trust. It will get quite tricky when you deal with jurisdictions where they don't have sort of the same registration requirements as South Africa has. Okay, so once again, foreign jurisdictions, then you may need to note that, you know, it's a bit of a higher risk client for you. So I said now trusts you need to do certain additional due diligence, but in terms of FICA, what is a trust? Okay, so it means the same definition as in the Trust Property Control Act, but there are certain exclusions. Okay, so those 4 exclusions apply when you set up when a trust is set up via a will, when there's a court order, or when somebody is put under curatorship, or when you're dealing with retirement funds. Okay, so that falls outside of the definition of a trust when you deal with FICA. Okay, so Fia and I had the discussion yesterday in terms of different legislations. Trust means different things. So be very careful when you deal with this, that you make use of the right definition. Okay. I spoke previously about risk rating your client as part of the customer due diligence. And then there's 3 definitions that sort of becomes very important. And the first one is that domestic politically exposed person. And I gave the full definition for you there as it is in Schedule 3. So obviously we're dealing with all those people in politics. There's the obvious ones, the presidents, the mayors, the leaders of political parties. Then maybe a less obvious one is that 4th one from the bottom. So there we're dealing with public entities, and then that CEO, CFO, CIO type of person that's at the head of that public entity would be your domestically politically exposed person, DPEP. And those people are regarded as higher risk. You need to work a process into your RMCP where a senior person approves the onboarding of this person. And then you must take reasonable measures to establish their source of wealth, source of funds, and you must do an enhanced ongoing monitoring of these people, of these individuals. So what do I mean when I talk about public entities? I'm going to use one very famous example. So Andre de Ruyter, he was the CEO of Eskom. He would be regarded as a DPEP. So if he does walk into your office and look to start a business relationship with you, or for you to do a transaction for him, he would be an example of somebody that's a high risk. and you need to make sure that you deal appropriately with him. As we saw in that example earlier of fines, Sanlam was fined because they didn't properly identify and verify DPEP. Okay, so you need to make sure whether you're dealing with one of these individuals. And just as much as we've got domestically politically exposed people, there are also foreign politically exposed people. And you'll see it's more or less aligned with the definition of the local, a bit more contracted. Once again, head of states, members of foreign royal family, and so forth and so forth. And when we deal with a DPEP and a FPEP, it's be sure that you're not dealing with one of their close family members, okay? Because if you are a money laundering, if you're looking to launder money, you will not put yourself in the front line. You may ask a family member to act on your behalf, to do whatever, to set up a trust, to do a foreign transfer, whatever services you're rendering to the public. Okay, so please make sure that person you're dealing with is not also a family member. Okay, so how do I know that? A simple Google search on that person. If you're dealing with Cyril Ramaphosa's wife, you're likely to find some pictures of her with him during the opening of Parliament, for example. Okay. And the last sort of category of more example of higher risk individuals, when you've got a company that renders services or goods to an organ of state, that company's chairperson of the audit committee, CEO, CFO type of person, they considered prominent influential persons. Again, they're higher risk, and you need to follow the proper process. So the catch at the moment is that definition says that the contract must be above a certain amount. That amount hasn't been published yet. Okay. You'll also, if you looked at the Directive 6 questions, there was questions about this in there as well. Okay, so on to our next pillar of compliance, reporting. There's the 4 types of reports that you can submit at the moment, or you are obliged to submit. So the first one, the cash threshold report, or shortly the CTR as they refer to. If you receive or pay out cash, and cash, we talk about coins, notes, or traveler's checks. If you pay out or receive 50,000 Rand or more, then you need to submit a report to the FIC within 3 days. So that's an obligation of all accountable institutions. You go onto your AML system and you submit the report there online. Okay, they've got a really nice video on their YouTube channel that gives you some guidance on how to submit reports. They also have a written guide on their website that will tell you how to go about submitting the various reports. The next one, and this is probably the one we all deal the most with, is suspicious and unusual transaction report. So STR or SAR. This actually, interestingly enough, is an obligation of all businesses, not just accountable institutions. This is a report that you need to, also you submit it on Go AML. You need to submit it as soon as possible, but no later than 15 days. And now, what would constitute suspicious and unusual? Here we're treading on what you know about your client. Okay, so we've done the due diligence, we know what type of business they're in, and all of a sudden, for example, this client comes and does one massive transaction. It doesn't make sense. If you look at the rest of his business, that would be suspicious and unusual transaction. A quick example about the suspicious activity would be somebody walks into your office, they want to make use of your services. when you tell them, oh, okay, great stuff, but I will need copies of your ID, proof of residence, maybe what's your tax number and some other details. And they say, oh, hang on, you know what? I didn't know you're going to ask me all of this. I would rather then not do business with you. That would be suspicious activity, because why would this person not want to provide this information to you? And then I must say their confidentiality. So you need to make sure that you do not tell anybody about this report that you submitted, especially not this person that you are reporting. So first of all, I want to emphasize that you don't have to prove a case when you submit these type of reports. You're just telling the FIC, hang on, there's something that happened here out of the ordinary, okay? You're not saying that your client on purpose committed a crime, okay? This might be just coincidental. And it's the FIC's job to now go and investigate this. And they won't tell the client that you're the one that submitted the report to them. And it's also then what will happen then if there is something untoward going on, your company, because you submitted the report, is hedged from prosecution. Okay, so that would be very important for you. It's also then, but this immunity from prosecution falls away if you tip somebody off that you submitted this report. Okay, so that's why it's important not to tell anybody about these reports. Okay, if you want to read a bit more about what would be suspicious sort of factors that you can take into account, you can go and read that guidance note 4B. Everything is on the FIC's website. Then the last two reports quickly is the terrorist property report. That would be when you realize that, oh, hang on, this person is on a UN sanctions list all of a sudden, and I've got control of their property. You need to submit a report to the FIC within 5 days. The last one you can just take notice of. It's electronic cross-border electronic transfer, but that's mainly applicable to the banks, and you can see the post office as well. So I'm not going to talk about that too much. Okay, so and then our next pillar of compliance is record keeping. So I gave a little list there of things we need to keep record of. And you'll see it's basically everything that we do into relation to our compliance obligations you need to keep record of. So FICA requires us to keep record for 5 years. So if your client relationship ends today, you need to keep records of your transactions and your client due diligence documents for the next 5 years. Just be mindful, there are other record keeping obligations out there, and I use the example there of the Companies Act that are more onerous. Make sure you comply with the more onerous requirement. Okay. Then you can keep your records electronically. This is actually one of the few functions that you can outsource. Now, just a word of caution, just because you outsource it, that doesn't mean it's not your responsibility anymore. If the FIC comes and they want to make sure that you did keep record, they're going to ask you. And they're not going to be impressed if you said, listen, I gave my records to XYZ company and they had an accident and those documents are gone for good. Okay, you're going to be fined. You're responsible. Okay. Okay, then our last requirement is, or our last compliance obligation is training. Okay, so you must provide ongoing training to your staff to make sure they know what to do in terms of FICA and your RMCP. So when you do these training sessions, make sure that you test their knowledge afterwards, that you have an attendance register, and then obviously you must do refresher training. As I said earlier, your RMCP can change, legislation changes. and you need to make sure your staff is up to date with these changes. Okay, once again, as in the previous slide, you need to keep a record of this. So for me, the FIC hosts a lot of events. There's one coming up against next week. Try and attend these events. They've also got a YouTube channel where you can view previous webinars that they hosted. It's usually jam-packed with a lot of information, and yeah, it gives you good guidance. And if you attend live, the biggest benefit is that you can ask them questions that they answer live during the session. Okay. Then I just quickly want to touch on Directive 8. That's a new requirement. It's been effective since 31 March that requires you to screen your employees. Now, the same way as we risk rated our clients, we're going to risk rate the different positions within our company as they relate to money laundering. So I'm going to use myself as an example. My position would be high risk. I write policy for my company. I advise the board. I do training for the staff. I mean, I approve the onboarding process, you know, in terms of verification, identification of the clients. So my position is high risk, for example. And then you need to decide, so you're going to screen your employee for competency and integrity. And I gave you a few examples there of what would encompass a proper screening in terms of competency and integrity. So once you've decided what risk rating is involved, you need to decide what type of screening you're going to do for that specific employee. Obviously, the lower risk, the less screening you're going to do. Okay. And then also important there, while you're writing your RMCP, just put it in your RMCP how you're going to deal with this. Okay. We're almost at the end, I promise you. I know I've said a lot now, but very, very important. You know, we've been learning the POPI lingo for the past 2 years, and this has a big influence on FICA, because when we collect information on our clients, there's a whole host of personal information in that. FICA gives you that justification, that legal reason why you're processing information, but you can't just go mad and, you know, ad infinitum collecting personal information. You need to make sure that the personal information you collect is aligned with the objective of FICA. As soon as you move beyond that, you're going to transgress POPI, and yeah, then you're going to deal with the information regulator. So I made a quick note there of what's very important. If your client refuses to give you information based on data privacy concerns, and you need to do a client due diligence process on them, you cannot start that business relationship with them. Or if you've got an existing relationship with that client and you need to re-FICA them, you cannot continue with the business relationship. And you need to consider if it's not a suspicious activity report that needs to be reported to the FIC as well. Okay, but there's that PCC 22A goes into detail of how POPI and FICA interacts. This is just a few guidelines. Yeah, so please go and read that. I made a little last note there of sharing information. So I'm going to use my company as an example. We follow a single view of a client. So if a client starts using services of subsidiary A, and 3 months later they start using subsidiary B, I'm not going to re-FICA them. I'm going to use that information. I'm going to share that information that subsidiary A got from my client in this new business relationship. And also, it also will help you to share information, risk factors that the one division picks up about a client that's also involved in another division. The important thing is that you must disclose to your client that you'll be sharing their information across the group as they make use of services across the group. And then you must put it in your RMCP as well. Okay. The last thing is just sort of a public announcement. So as you know, you are supposed to have a PIA manual on your website. In terms of section 32, all public bodies must on an annual basis submit a report to the information regulator. Then the information regulator has the option in terms of section 83(4) to ask private bodies also to submit reports. So that's exactly what the information regulator did this year. They sent out a news announcement that they're going to ask private bodies to submit those reports. It's due by the end of the month. So go and register on the information regulator's website, even if you have registered before. I had that with my company. I registered the entities and I had to go and re-register this year. They don't accept manual registrations anymore. There's a guide available on their website for you to follow on how to register, how to submit your reports. And once you've registered, you get a certificate that you've registered and you can submit your report online. And the next question I know is going to be, what questions are they going to ask us? There's the questions that they ask you. Okay. And as soon as you've submitted your report, you'll get an email to say, thank you, we received your report. Okay. I hope this was an informative session. This is going to be, like I said earlier, we learned to speak the Popi lingo 2 years ago. This is going to be the same thing. We need to learn to speak FICA now. It's going to be a journey. Don't leave it until the last minute. As you see, there's quite a bit of work involved, and yeah, good luck, everyone.
Marianne, I cannot thank you enough. You reduced my stress levels considerably. I could not do this. So thank you very, very much, I think, on behalf of everyone for putting in the time and the effort. I'm sure there's lots of questions which I will not be able to answer. So I will give your email address out as part of the, sending out the recording, etc. So people welcome to reach out to Marianne. And again, thank you very much. I'm sure we all have learned a couple of things that we weren't aware of before. There are a couple of questions. So I'm going to quickly shoot through the last bit of my slides. And then I will make sure that share screen, that I will leave questions for the end. So I'm literally going to go through this very, very quickly. So I think all in all, and I think that's the purpose of all these discussions, is kind of which hat are you wearing, what are we doing, in which capacity are we acting? And I think this is important to remember. Today we are specifically speaking about the purple hat, the FIC hat. We as accountable institutions, what we have to do. And when you read the master's requirements in terms of the Trust Property Control Act, what are the requirements there? They're kind of the FIC flavor items. We have to remember SARS is also kind of involved in all of these discussions, especially as far as kind of beneficial ownership are concerned. And then the enforcement agencies are the additional things that we need to be aware of, the moment we deal with them. So this is very important, and that's why I got myself in a bit of a knit yesterday when I spoke to Marianne about which trust I included, what excluded. So I think that's the purpose of these discussions. And again, we as an industry can actually push and give feedback to the regulators in terms of, standardizing all the different requirements. For example, when you look at beneficial ownership that SARS requires, the master requires, FIC deals with that, to keep those fields consistent that we report, because it does actually become a nightmare. And I'm, trying to stop myself from having heart palpitations after this, because I think FIC is a relatively new concept for a lot of the service providers. I'm not saying it's been around for many years, but traditionally the banks concern themselves with the FIC and their requirements. So just quickly back to the 8 strategic actions, what is to come in the next couple of months after we've been grey listed, etc., etc. 2 of them are government wants to improve the risk-based supervision of designated non-financial business professions. That's the accountants, everybody on that schedule 2 that Marianne spoke about. And government wants to demonstrate that all anti-money laundering and combating of terrorist financing supervisors apply effective, proportionate and effective sanctions for non-compliance. And then government wants to demonstrate a sustained increase in law enforcement agencies' requests for intelligence from the FIC, for the investigations, and then the targeted sanctions that, they remind us of. So I think just to keep that in mind, as far as the whole grey listing is concerned and all these legislations that were amended late December last year. So Marianne has dealt with this, who are accountable institutions, and that item 2 on Schedule 1 has been replaced. And it's now, as far as trusts are concerned, there's a whole big thing at the top of, the CMD here dealing with companies. As far as it relates to trust, it's a person who carries on the business of creating a trust arrangement for a client. And I'll go into those kind of highlighted words. And also a person who carries on the business of preparing for or carrying out transactions relating to the investment, safekeeping, control, or administration of trust property within the meaning of the Trust Property Control Act. So with the recent introduction of accountants, my brain still fries with where, does the FIC see, accountants kind of in the mix here. So basically now when you're registering a trust, when you're doing trust admin, when you're a trustee, when you do accounting as a business, you would have to register, as Marianne said, in terms of as an accounting institution. So a person refers to both natural persons and legal persons. And that's in relation to PCTA, which is the public compliance communication that's been issued. So a lot of people say, yeah, but if I'm an independent trustee, my personal capacity is surely not just for businesses. So it's natural persons and legal persons. And then Marianne said we register as an entity when we register with the FIC. Carries on business. A lot of people say, what does it mean, in relation to these requirements? So it's clearly it's not defined in the FIC Act. And the ordinary meaning of the term should be within the context of the FIC Act, should be applied. And then PCC 6A also, mentioned this. So PCC 6A is a good one for everybody to read as far as trust and company services providers are concerned. And they said their business is that of a commercial activity or institution, as opposed to a charitable undertaking or government institution. So therefore, persons who are appointed as providing TCSP functions on an occasional basis, or who perform the function in a personal capacity, so like I'm a trustee for my friend, or I just drafted one trust deed, you don't do that as a business. So they look here as an ongoing commercial basis, as a regular features of their business for clients, and I'm not required to be registered as a TCSP. So here a lot of people say, yeah, but I don't charge for my trustee services. I don't charge for trust administration. I don't think it's got anything to do with that. I don't see there that if you don't charge, we all know nothing is for free, so you make money up elsewhere. So if you do this as a regular feature as part of your commercial business, then you would have to be registered. So I think business clarifies that in PCC 6A. Creating can include assisting a client on the registration or the administrative processes to register an entity with a relevant government organization, such as the master here. And it can also include advising on legal requirements associated with the creation of such an entity. Trusts include trust created between parties, that's an inter vivos trust, and includes trust established locally and for trust established outside of South Africa. That's also in PCC 6A. And then where I got myself in a complete knit is trust arrangements. I saw one amendment and I thought they kind of reverted back to include all trusts, but it actually had another amendment on the FIC's website. So a trust arrangement specifically exclude a trust created by a court order, the testamentary distribution position, curators of trust created by trustees of retirement fund in respect of benefits payable to beneficiaries of that retirement fund. So it exclude, that's another question arises, is this not what we should take back to the regulators? Because as far as I'm concerned, the General Law Amendment Act actually, deals with anti-money laundering. So if the FIC excludes these kind of trusts and consider that as kind of probably, not the riskier types of trusts. Should we not take that back to the Department of Justice for the master, as well as speak to SARS to see whether we can align the definitions? Because is this not what we are all after, is anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing? And then the question arose also in the comments bar, what about special trusts? I really do not believe one SARS is happy to label a trust as a special trust. We're going to necessarily launder money through that. It remains to be seen. I would like SARS's view on that at some point as well. So this is typically something that we can escalate. When preparing for or carrying out of a transaction, that can relate to a once-off business or ongoing business planning. So it could be a once-off transaction as well. So that just helps when you actually go through Schedule 1 and in order to identify whether you should register or not as a accountable institution. On 6 June, in my introductory email to all of you for the session, there was a 6 June presentation, and on the invite it says registration, risk-based approach, and FIC obligations, accountants. So I also got a heart attack because I never interpreted that item 2 as applicable to accountants necessarily, unless you provide trust services like we know it. And then in the presentation, the topic was actually registration, risk-based approach, and compliance obligation of trust and company service providers. So I almost got the feeling when they started speaking that it actually much broader and not just accountants. But yeah, accountants are in now, and reference was made a couple of times. I will forward the slides of that presentation, and as Marianne said, it would possibly also appear on their YouTube channel, FIC. So PCC 6A, it's still in draft format, where they provide guidance on trust and company service providers for the purpose of Schedule 1 of the Act. So if you just want to go read that, just if you're not 100% certain whether you should or should not register, where it says TCSPs are included as accountable institutions given their susceptibility to exploitation by those looking for methods to launder criminal proceeds or raising funds for terrorist activity. So clearly the FIC does not like trusts, is my conclusion. TCSP is any person in the ordinary course of business who assists their clients in the creation, operation, and manage of an external company, a foreign company, a close corporation, or a trust. And that includes attending to the registration of the business entity with the relevant authority, as I said earlier. And then organizations that provide the services of TCSPs will be considered as an accountable institution, regardless of whether the employees are auditors, accountants, or other professionals. So it looks like you must go to the underlying service that you provide and not give it a label. It's not necessarily all accountants. I think if you just do personal stuff, I must still figure this out. If you just do personal income tax returns, I can't see that it falls under it, unless, Marianne, you want to make a note and correct me if I'm wrong. If a person is, however, registered with the centre as an accountable institution under a different schedule, and in addition performs functions of a TCSP, then you would be required to register additionally as an item 2 with the centre. And I think a lot of people still don't know that. They just said they are registered. No, I ask them for what. They say, yeah, I don't know, we just registered. So this is an additional item that you have to register for unless you have done so yet. And that they refer to that as dual registration, and the draft that they refer to there explains the obligations. Okay, then, so some risk indicators. I'm not going to go through this individually. I will send you the slides. Very interesting. I just picked a couple relating to trust, for example, those forgivable loans in the middle there. So it's going to be interesting, those interest-free loans, never repayable, no repayment terms, to make sure that we can demonstrate that that's probably now risk management plans. Multiple appearance of the same parties. Some trust structures are really complicated. They specifically refer to as the first one when there's complex multiple trust structures, though we all know these multiple trust structures that were implemented, so where the one trust is the beneficiary of another. So yeah, I think these things you're going to have to consider when you actually risk rate your clients potentially, as Marianne explained in your kind of risk-based approach that you're going to follow. And then irregularity or limited duration of client relationships, where she said they want to engage with you, and all of a sudden don't want to engage with you, or when you start asking uncomfortable questions, then to stop the relationship. and also when there's frequent changes in, for example, trustees. So yeah, these are a couple of nice checklist items that we can go through probably in our risk rating that we have to do. So a lot of people think there's like an ongoing reporting that you have to do similar to like beneficial ownership information. We do not submit beneficial ownership reports to the FIC. We submit that to the master and to SARS on their new trust tax return. So these are the reports that Marianne referred to. I stole the slide out of that 6 June presentation. So this gives you an idea in terms of what you have to report, but Marianne has extensively dealt with that, but not ongoing reporting, both for beneficial ownership or the accountable institutions that the trustees deal with. You don't have to submit that to the FIC. We'll have a look at that now. So Directive 6, that's been thrown around a lot. That was already due on 31st of May. And they wanted us to submit information regarding our understanding of money laundering. So there was a lot of questions in terms of, do you understand this and that and so forth? And they wanted to get a sense of the risk assessment and compliance with the obligations of the party concerned. So that was already due 31st of May. So I don't know, Marianne, whether you could say whether it's going to be a penalty, should people still do it if you pass that date, if you haven't registered. I think a lot of people still haven't registered. So what do you do? Would there be a possibility to resubmit that or not?
So I know the FIC said that they kept the online submission portal open. I'm not too sure if it will still be open. So I think if you haven't done it, try to do it. But yeah, if this is in terms, these submissions are in terms of a directive. So if you do not comply, they will follow a penalty from the FIC.
I just hear penalties and fines and stuff. It's really freaked me out. Okay, so now I just want to flip away from the FIC, which Marianne has dealt with extensively. And again, you can ask, send her emails. I made a couple of questions. I'm going to try and, shoot through the next couple of slides. I just wanted to have a look in relation to the Trust Property Control Act. Where's the FIC flavor items? We've dealt with that briefly in the last sessions. Remember, these Trust Property Control Act amendments are effective from 1 April 2023 already. So you would be non-compliant if you don't meet these requirements. And the FIC ones, as I said, you haven't had to report this to anybody. This is what the trustees have to do, as trustees. So section 10(2), which is under trust account section under the Trust Property Control Act, trustees are required to disclose their positions as trustees to an accountable institution with which a trustee is engaged in that capacity, and to make it known to that accountable institution. So there's some activity, we need to change behavior in trustees, and I'll have a look at in the next slide in terms of what does that mean practically in my world. Section 11(1), they put that under registration identification of trust property, where trustees need to keep details of the accountable institutions which they use as agents or to perform trustee functions, and to provide any services to trustees. So there we need to keep a register. So again, important that is a new obligation on the trustees. So just given all the complexity around FIC, can you see how important it is to actively hold the hands of the layperson trustees now, to actually educate them about these kind of FIC flavor items, and for you as a trust service provider to stay on top of what FIC requires of us, especially if you are acting as an independent trustee. Okay, and then a beneficial ownership stuff I'm not going to talk about today. So okay, so when we look at what trustees have to do regarding the interactions with accountable institutions in terms of that new section, trustees must also almost become little FIC experts now, because they need to identify who are accountable institutions. And from what Marianne explained to me, it seemed like the FIC is pushing it further and further and further out. So they almost want to include everyone. So the moment a trustee deals with anybody, they probably have to ask them as the first couple of questions, are you an accountable institution? So that I can keep a report and I can, demonstrate that I've told you that I'm acting in my capacity as a trustee. Trustees have to keep a register of the accountable institutions they deal with in terms of that section. And then you need to inform the accountable institution that the trustee is acting in their capacities as trustees. So what would that mean? I think paperwork is going to become more important than ever. You're going to have to demonstrate to anybody who audits you or go and audit the accountable institution concerned to say, show us the paperwork that this person, told you is acting in his capacity as a trustee. And if it's going to be a he said, she said thing. So I think paperwork is going to be critical. And more important than ever, just cover ourselves. So discipline is key. We're going to have these requirements in an engagement letter. We need to get an indemnity if the trustees don't cooperate with you as an independent trustee. You need resolutions of the board of trustees before anybody can deal with an accountable institution concerned. You can see the tightened compliance that we're going to have to instill with trustees to keep things real time for all the trustees to participate. They can no longer run around and expect you as an independent trustee just to sign a whole wad of resolutions at the end of the year. To try and remain compliant. It's going to be active trust administration and to demonstrate this at any point in time, because these, FIC visits can happen anytime to the accountable institutions. And then we would have to be able to demonstrate that we've complied with the legislation. And then after we've got the resolution, I say we need a confirmation to that accountable institution in writing, so that when the FIC actually cross-checks that they can actually see that the trustees, meet their requirements. So what we've done in our system is we traditionally had the transacting entity tab, and we defined whether such a person is a connected person in relation to the trust for tax purposes. We've used that same measure now for every transaction in the trust to say, are we dealing with an accountable institution? Mark it. It's going to prepare accountable institution report or keep that up to date real-time basis. And then once the trustee actually deals with it, then we'd have an action tab there to say this person actually has confirmed to the accountable institution concerned that they're acting in their capacity as a trustee. So paperwork, as I said, is going to become more important than ever. Very quickly go through the beneficial owner definitions. Just when we speak about the FIC, it's very important, as I say, which hat are we wearing? When I look at the FIC definitions of beneficial owners and I compare that to the Trust Property Control Act, they are slightly different, and I can understand why it causes the confusion that it still does. So it's got no definition. It's kind of piggybacking on how they interpret it, and they got different requirements. And I think I've dealt with that last time. All these requirements of the different entities are different, and I think we should really ask government to kind of align and just make it a little bit more simpler. It's stressful enough to keep up with everything. So when you look at the FIC, so this is now the accountable institution. So you as an accountable institution have to identify natural persons who directly or indirectly ultimately owns or exercises effective control of a client of yours, or a legal person, partnership, or trust that owns or exercises effective control of that client. Or it could be a natural person who exercises control of a client of an accountable institution on whose behalf a transaction is being conducted. So that's a separate one. And they specifically include them in respect of a trust. Each natural person is contemplated in section 21B4. And I'll have a look at that in the next slide. So when you compare that definition to kind of the wording that they use in Trust Property Control Act, again, it's a natural person who directly, indirectly, ultimately owns the relevant trust property. So now we're thinking in our capacities as trustees. So now an accountable institution is, a beneficial owner is a natural person who ultimately owns the relevant trust property, or a natural person who exercises effective control of the administration of the trust arrangement. So can you see it's a slight difference there? When you look at, and then as I said, SARS got no definition. When you look at that section 21(4)(c), they actually went into the different role players, the founders, each founder, if it's a person, if the founder is a legal person or person acting above a partnership, or in terms of a trust arrangement, the beneficial owner of that legal person. So you can see they stick to the beneficial owner, which is, that whole list of people. So in my mind, you would carry on and on and on. If the founder is, for example, another trust, then you're going to have to look at all their beneficial owners around that trust. That's the founder. If the founder, if the in Trust Property Control Act, we'll have a look there, the individual founder, or if the founder is a legal entity or a trust or a partnership, then you would go and find directly the natural person who directly or indirectly ultimately owns or exercises effective control of that legal entity, partnership, or trust. So you can see FIC is wider, beneficial owner. The moment there's a legal entity or trust involved, when we have that in a Trust Property Control Act, you go directly to just the natural person who directly, indirectly, ultimately owns or effectively controls that. So that's a slight difference. Similar for trustees, each natural person trustee, or if it's a legal person, the beneficial owner. And on the Trust Property Control Act side, it's the natural person, so directly to the natural person, not again all the beneficial owners around that legal entity. One definition that I think confuses people in terms of which hat am I wearing, what am I doing? You can see there, for trustees, in addition to what is similar to for the Trust Property Control, like a beneficial owner, there is also a natural person who purports to be authorized to enter into a single transaction or establish a business relationship with the accountable institution on behalf of the trust, whether such a person is appointed as a trustee of the trust or not. So a trustee for the FIC Act may include somebody who's acting on behalf of the trustees. You may don't have to be a trustee. Okay, beneficiaries quickly. So again, back to the natural person beneficiary, and that is by name in the trust instrument. So can you see it's exactly the same for the FIC Act as well as the Trust Property Control Act. Again, if it's a legal entity, a partnership, or a trust, then the beneficial owner for the FIC Act, and directly for the Trust Property Control Act into the natural person concerned. And here's a definition that confuses people. For FIC, when you're accountable institution, that is if beneficiaries are not referred to by name in the trust instrument, in other words, a class, the particulars of how the beneficiaries of the trust are determined. So that is where a lot of people confuses, when I'm working with a FIC or the Trust Property Control Act, only named in terms of the trust instrument. There was some compliance company that said, it includes beneficiary who accepted benefits. It's actually not. It's just by name in the trust instrument. And then careful for FIC Act, they've got classes. We just need to do a little bit more work for classes are concerned. Okay, so I think there's so much compliance costs, etc., etc. So just again, in terms of our system, we have managed, and you may know about that, to get a professional indemnity product that we can get quite cheaply because everything is integrated. Risk for the insurer much reduced, and also busy incorporating FICA software, which is going to make lives much simpler. When you look at the penalties for the FIC, I mean, they're almost a little bit more hair-raising compared to the 10 million fines that we can get, if we don't comply with the Trust Property Control Act. So yeah, chat to me if you haven't seen a demo of our system yet, and see if we can use the savings in the PI cover and the FIC software to subsidize the platform's costs. So thank you. I think we can spend 5 minutes just quickly on questions that people asked, and then we can wrap up. So Marianne, if you can help me out here. Special trust, obviously specifically excluded. So just want to confirm, and I think that's probably a point that we can escalate to the regulators to have that excluded for beneficial ownership stuff as well.
Yeah, I've tried to answer a question here and there. I think onto that next question of Corneille, who asks about clients or FSPs and attorneys, do they need to do client due diligence on their clients? So Corneille, your clients will be the FSPs and attorneys. So your client due diligence will be on the FSPs and attorneys, not their clients. Okay.
I think that's quite an interesting one, because I think in the trust world, we often work with referrals, and, the attorneys refer to the trust service providers and accountants and likewise. So that's an interesting one. So if somebody refers, you actually figure the referrer.
That's your client. Obviously, you will then know who the ultimate, let's call it the ultimate client is, because you will obviously also have all their personal information already in hand in order to register that trust. But your client will be the FSP and that attorney.
And I think that will be particularly relevant with that first requirement in terms of the definition. If you register trusts if you register trust as a business, I think the second one is a personal relationship already, because you provide that service as a trustee or as administrator. I don't think you're going to get away there to say, no, but somebody referred it. So there you're going to start building a relationship with the board of trustees concerned, and would then have to require that information for them.
Yes, you remain an accountable institution, and because you're an accountable institution, like we said, now client due diligence is one of your responsibilities.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick note on, because these FSPs, there will be shareholders in there, and there may be directors, or depending on what form they take. And you spoke a lot now about beneficial ownership. So the principle you apply there is what they call a look-through principle. You need to unpack these structures, and I think it's also apparent from the definition. You unpack these structures until you get to the warm bodies, the FIAs and the Marians and whoever at the back of this. Those are the people you need to identify and make sure, oh, hang on, they're not on a financial, they're not on the sanctions list, or they're not associated with some criminal cartel, or whatever the case may be.
Okay, I quickly want to answer some questions here. Are testamentary trusts obliged to submit a register of beneficial ownership? Absolutely, and this the disconnect now. That's why I'm saying we should try and get to the regulator to see whether they, for beneficial ownership purposes, can also exclude, the trust concerned, like Marianne explained, the testamentary trusts, and kind of a couple more curatorship trusts and so forth. And the other one, must all trustees be registered with the FIC? Remember, it's not the Board of Trustees who are to register with the FIC. They're not accountable institutions. People around the Board of Trustees who provide the services, such as you're doing trust administration, you are the trust accountant, you are acting as the independent trustee. So not the layperson family trustees, it's not the actual trust that has to register with the FIC. It's service providers, I almost want to say, around the trust. Okay, so, and Marianne, probably the last question, unless somebody has, more questions, just please clarify for me after the 6th of June presentation. As I said, it was broad strokes accountants. Now, somebody said earlier on, you may have answered that. Does it include secretarial services, tax practitioners, when you just do the accounting, when you do the financial statements, when you do auditing, kind of who's envisaged in that item too?
So the view of the FIC is it's not so much your profession. You need to go and measure yourself against that definition. If you comply with all the requirements in that definition, you need to register. And in that presentation, they mentioned accountants, tax practitioners specifically. So yes, those people have to register.
Okay, so it's any tax practitioner that touches a trust. Is that the consensus?
Well, it's also when you not just touch a trust. I know this is the focus for today, but also other companies. So remember, it's a trust and company service provider. Yes, but yes, trust specifically, and then also companies as well. Because
if you touch a trust, if you touch a company, whether you're doing secretarial services for them, whether you provide tax advice or the tax administration, whether you do the debits and credits, as kind of the day-to-day accountant, for the company, whether you do an audit or whether you do financial statements for a trust or a company, you have to be registered.
Yes, those were the names named by the FIC. So yes, you need to register.
Okay, so I don't know if we can take one more question here at the bottom. Can't SARS argue that the definition of beneficial owner in section 64D of the income tax would apply? In other words, any person owning shares. Yes, that SARS had one use or definition of beneficial owner, and that's way back when. Can't remember, I said it once. In relation to section 64D, which is shareholders with dividends. So that was their definition. Apart from that, there's no definition. Okay. When an accountant, tax practitioner registers FIC, which option need to select at the organization business type? Is it BE, business entity with reporting obligation in terms of section 29? Marianne, I don't know if you can answer that.
Sorry, is that the question from Amelia?
Lynette.
Yes.
When an accountant or tax practitioner registers for the FIC, which option need to be selected at the organization business type? Is it BE, business entity, with reporting obligation in terms of section 29?
Sure. No, sorry, Lynette. Can I answer? Just go and have a look at it. Yeah, and then answer you. I can't answer you offhand. Sorry.
Okay, so on that note, thanks to everybody, and again, Marianne, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. It was very informative,
Pleasure.
and I welcome anybody who knows more than us to help and participate, and so we can kind of get an industry view. I will escalate. I'm talking to the Master's office regarding the security around the portal, so hopefully we will get some answers there. And I think the next month session is probably a good time to chat just about a lot of just a question and answer session. I think all of us are pretty much up to speed in terms of the basics for FIC and the Trust Property Control Act and kind of how they interlink. So I would, work on a slide with a lot of questions and answers, just really practical, and then feedback in terms of the issues that we've raised and how we can escalate that to government, just to help us to comply, because it becomes a little bit of a nightmare to wear different hats, and when you wear that hat that's got different requirements, that you're reporting on the same kind of aspect, which is anti-money laundering and combating of terrorist financing. So to me, it's one theme, and therefore all the information should be consistent. So thanks, everyone. I will send the recording as well as the slides, and I'll invite then for probably in a month's time. Have fun. If you got any questions, you can let me know, and I will provide you with Marianne's contact details if you've got further questions on the technical bits. Thanks a lot.